Hi, I'm Adam Zonder, the production manager for the Hangar Theater Company, and welcome to an episode of In Good Spirits. As we have gone virtual for the 2020 summer season and everyone is working from home, I'm currently sitting in an empty theater, which is very, very weird considering it is during the summer. Between the ongoing pandemic and this being my 25th season with the Hangar, we thought having some conversations with the various designers and technicians with whom I've worked over the years would be fun and in good spirits. I would like to take a moment to give a large thank you and shout out to our series sponsor, Myer Farm Distillers, located in Ovid, New York. Joe and his team produce various award-winning vodkas, gins, and my personal favorite, bourbons. Please check them out at meyerfarmdistillers.com. So today I'm having a conversation with Jen Caprio, dear friend and costume designer for Broadway and Regional Theater. How are you today, Jen?
Hey, I'm doing great. How you doing?
Good. Where are you holed up during all of this?
I've been two places. I stayed with friends in Ossining, New York, which is in Westchester County, because I live alone and have a dog, and I see a Piers in the background right now. And so the thought of having to deal with my very old dog in the middle of the pandemic was not good. So I was there for 12 weeks, and now I am back in Harlem.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I hope safe and healthy.
So far, knock on wood.
Great. So you are an Ithaca College alum, which is probably news to some people. So why did you end up choosing IC?
When I went to IC, it was one of the few colleges that was both offering a liberal arts education, but sort of tied to what could be considered a conservatory education for theater and for art. It was important to me to be able to study, things that are not theater, because theater is about things that are not theater. There is nothing I find more insufferable than theater about theater. Also I wanted a very in-depth conservatory education. They'd probably bristle a little bit about me saying that, but you do have a very tight, deep, only undergraduate education at Ithaca College, which was also something that I liked about it. I didn't want to have to share production assignments and real life experience with grad students. And also I just really liked the campus. Of course, I visited it in July, which is beautiful.
Of course.
Yeah.
So did you go to Ithaca College knowing you wanted to be a costume designer?
Yeah, I kind of decided, very arbitrarily, with my guidance counselor in high school. She asked me what I wanted to do. I was very good at science and math. I wanted to do those things. I have much more of a problem-solving brain than a traditional artsy sort of brain. And she was like, well, what do you like? And I was like, well, I really like drawing and I really like theater. And she was like, well, you should go be a theater designer. And I was like, what? That's a thing? I can do that? And she was like, yeah, you go see Broadway. I grew up in Jersey. I went to see Broadway. My uncle was a music director. I just couldn't get enough of it. So I was like, fine, I'm going to do that. Where should I go to college? And she was like, you should go to Ithaca College. And that's really how it happened. It found me as much as I found it.
So did you then not do theater in high school?
I did, but I went to a small high school in New Jersey that had, we did one play, one musical actually a year. So I really didn't do anything other than be in one show a year. But I went to a lot of theater, and also, it was a rebellious moment of my life. I'm gonna go be an artist. A little bit of a gamble for your whole entire life, but that's how teenagers are, I suppose.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of costume design, what is it that you enjoy about it?
Oh gosh, I love people. People are an endless source of entertainment. People are amazing collaborators. People are just I don't know, they fascinate me, and it's all about the storytelling. So I just fell in love with that side of things. I don't think I knew that's what I was doing at the time. To be honest, if we rewind to the mid-90s, I really wanted to be a film director, and everyone told me I couldn't be a film director because I was a woman and it was really hard to do such a thing. But women design costumes. So, I mean, we're talking the 90s with a feminist mother.
Wow.
And, you know, like, so, who are all encouraging me to be the strong, independent bleep that I am. And so that is initially, honestly, my costume design seemed like the right fit because it was a thing that women did. And there were a lot of brilliant costume designers who were women that I admired. You know, the Colleen Atwoods of the world, of course Edith Head, because that she was Edith Head, you know, and I loved classic films. I couldn't get enough of Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly, you know, like, so that's what drew me, you know, sort of that like glamour, which, you know, then we realize when we get into the job that it's not quite all that glamour, but it's, that's how I ended up kind of in costumes. And what I've really fallen in love with is the collaboration and the ability to tell story through something that is so pedestrian to us. You know, we all put on clothes, and, you know, you're wearing a green shirt today, and I've often seen you in that color. It's a good color. You know, it's
it
good.
happens to be my favorite color.
Yeah. So that, you know, you're telling me a story right now by your green polo. Same way I'm like, I'm New York. This is my New York uniform. Got a black t-shirt.
That's great. So you said when you were growing up, you got to go see Broadway shows and whatnot. Do you remember what your first one was?
Oh, it is so cliche, Adam. Do you want to guess?
Les Mis.
Yep. 7 times.
You saw Les Mis 7 times on Broadway?
On Broadway in the 90s, actually
Wow.
starting in the 80s. I saw the original cast, and I was just, my head exploded. I was like, this is theater? What? So, yeah,
awesome.
and then, like, you just, I mean, and then I saw City of Angels, which is, like, not a lot of people know of, which
I actually saw that production.
oh my gosh, brilliant, right? The whole black
Yeah.
and white versus color thing. Oh, it was so cool.
Yeah,
And
the first time I'd ever
cast-
seen anything like that.
Yeah. Oh, it was brilliant. The lighting in that show was actually, I think Paul Gallo did it. It was beautiful. I could be totally wrong.
I don't know.
You know, it's just like all of the, you know, I'm trying to think what else. You know, Sunset Boulevard at the time, that was like later 90s, but like, oh my, maybe mid 90s. Just like all of those grand, huge musicals just blew my mind. And I was like, I want to be a part of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what are some things that our audience would not realize is a part of costume design?
Oh, that's a good question. Because I just assume everybody knows because they put on clothes every day. Things that are part of costume design. There's a lot of reading and research. You know, just because we wear clothes doesn't mean we know exactly what clothes were worn when, especially in this day and age with like Pinterest and the internet. Like, so much of the internet is wrong. So there's a lot. I know, right? Fake news on costume history. So that's something that I think people don't register. And then once they learn about it, they're like, oh, a lot of times people think, oh, you must sew. And I can sew, but there are people who sew better than me who do that job. You know, it's like any business. You've got an accountant, you've got a VP of marketing. You know, your VP of marketing probably can crunch numbers, but you don't want your VP of marketing to be the accountant or vice versa, you know, like so it's just basically a similar world where, you know, there are people who make hats. I can trim a hat. You don't want to look too closely at what that looks like. So that's something I think people don't often know. And then also like that the most expensive part of a costume sometimes can absolutely be the underwear and the shoes. You know, I mean, like you and I have talked about this ad nauseum over years. Like, we can have a small budget, but like I still got to buy an $80 bra for somebody who's a standard bra size, or like someone who has a size 15 foot. That's just a $300 shoe, whether or not I want it to be. You know, I mean, sometimes you can get a bargain, but you can't guarantee that. And that's not something I can go find at the Salvation Army. So, you know, with certain rules with unions and such, like that's something that's always plaguing a costume designer and production department is like, this is just costs us so much. Then another thing which is more specific to my job at Sesame Street, which is I'm one of the costume designers for the human beings on Sesame Street. And you really have to consider the color balance, and like a lot of people don't think about that. They just think, oh, you're going to put a color on someone that looks good, but actually I need to think about the color on the human, the color with the humans that they're with, and then in front of the set. And so specifically on Sesame Street, because we've all seen that show, or most of us, the background is very busy and there's a lot of texture and color. So normally your response or your solution would be, oh, I'm going to put a solid or not a very busy pattern on this person, a very bold color to pop them out from the background. But then you have the Muppets and they're solid. Then when you put Elmo in front of a red polo shirt, all you have is a pair of eyeballs. And like, that's not good either. So there's so many things that go into it, like forgetting what I've learned at school, you know, like it's just like, oh, underwear is expensive. Shoes are expensive. You know, Elmo disappears on red, obviously.
Of course.
You know, so those are just a few things, you know. Maybe that's all obvious. I don't know.
I was going to get to Sesame Street later, but since you brought it up now, I'll ask. So how did that come about, making that transition from theater to, well, TV and specifically Sesame Street?
Well, Adam Zonder, is this where we come to the point where I can admit that I can trace back almost all of my jobs to you?
Really? Oh, thanks.
So, Ithaca,
I had no idea.
1997. Jared Lease was the costume designer for that summer. And he became a mentor and friend of mine over the years. And through Jared, I met Brian Hemisath, who is another costume designer. They worked together at Saturday Night Live, and they both designed Sesame Street. And several years ago, I'd worked with Brian mostly as a tailor. He's an exquisite tailor, and so is Jared, actually. Makes like exquisite shirts, and he's a tailor for film and television as well. He moved on to another project. He was on another TV show, and Brian needed an assistant and another designer for the humans on Sesame Street. And he was like, hey, like, we've been getting along great for years. Do you want to do this job? And I was like, abso-effing-lutely. Do I want to hang out with Muppets every day? And I have not turned back. It's been like the best thing ever.
So is that filmed in New York?
It's filmed in Queens. You take the R train to Steinway. That's how you get to Sesame Street.
Of course. And you've been, clearly it sounds like you've been enjoying it.
Oh, it's great. I mean, there are some weird things that come up. Like, we get to be super creative. Sometimes it's like, okay, just a shirt. You know, sometimes if there's a million kids. My favorite days are the ones where it's like, oh, you know, Issa Rae is going to play a fairy godmother, and what does that look like? And the joy of working at Sesame Street is they're very progressive and very much about inclusivity and equality and diversity. So what's awesome is it's like, how do we promote strong, wonderful characters within that world? And that's always part of the conversation, which doesn't necessarily happen everywhere you go. Or it's not, you know, it's like, it gets so glossed over often, and it's never not part of the conversation at our job, which I love.
Yeah, and well, it should be part of the job.
Always, yeah, 100%.
Yes. Great. So let's jump back to a little theater. So your actual first season of The Hangar was 1997, as you mentioned.
Yep.
You were a stitcher in the costume shop. I
was.
Yeah. Do you have any memory of that?
I have a lot of memories. Actually have such fond memories of, there was a designer there, and he just blew my mind, Walker Hicklin. And he just passed away, actually, about a month or change ago.
I know, I heard. It was very sad.
So sad. And also, I didn't realize, at the time when he had come to us, he had done a ton of big films. Mm-hmm. Like, I had no idea he was this fancy designer. And I was driving him around, you know, I was like 20, 19? I think I was 20, 97, I was 20. And I was like, in my crappy Dodge Neon driving this like big time film designer around. I have no idea who the man is. He's just super nice. And he's like just telling me all these stories about the business and was so positive and also like had a really good perspective on things. He was about to do a project, somewhere in California, and it was an Arcadia, and he had $100,000 budget. Now this was, almost 25 years ago, so that's
Right.
a lot of money even then. And he was like, I think it's kind of grotesque to spend that much money on something like this. And that sort of always stuck with me. So there was that. And we're working with Gretchen, who was the costume shop manager and also many time designer at the Hangar. She taught me so much about how clothes put together.
Gretchen Darrow.
Yeah, Gretchen Darrow. Yep. Just how to talk to actors. Watching her, and that summer had some great designers, Nancy Adsima, and I'm just remembering these because like it's stuck in my little impressionable brain, and Jared Leese, and then I remember Jared just being like, there was a day where things were going very badly, and he was like, you need to always remember that like if we don't make the right decision on a costume, like small children will not die. And that has stuck with me for 23 years.
It's very true.
It's very true. So, like, I have so many, and, like, I don't remember, honestly, if it's conflating, because there were those 2 years I worked there, if it was that summer or the following. I think it was the following when then Lily took over because Gretchen went to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to continue to learn from Lily Westbrook, who was a mentor of mine at Ithaca, to be able to coexist with her in a world that wasn't just educational was also really good for growth. I think it's an important part of undergraduate education is to be able to work, be able to like see what this thing you think you want to do actually is.
That's great. And that's what we strive for, being that teaching theater that I always proclaim here. And then you first time as a designer here was 2001. With Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Joseph, and which I was very proud of, but the review of the clothes seared into my memory was that I made everyone look uniformly ungainly.
I don't remember that one. Wow.
Yeah. But we've grown since then. Also, they were biblical clothes.
Yes, they were.
How are people supposed to look in biblical clothes? Anyway. But yeah, that was my first one back, and that's when I met dear sweet Kevin Moriarty, and we have been lifelong collaborators since. I always say I grew up at the Hangar, and it was like we were all kids together,
Mm-hmm.
a little tongue-in-cheek, but I've met most of my adult collaborators because of Hangar, and Kevin was such a good friend and someone who really drove concepts for better or for worse. Like if we succeeded, it was brilliant, and then when we would fail, it was a brilliant failure. Like we committed, and so it was always exciting to be able to go play and like get messy, do all that stuff. And I did the Joseph because Jared Leese couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, it was great having you back for that. And you did 5 shows with Kevin at the Hangar. So is he the director? No, with just Kevin. It was Joseph, Leading Kansas, As You Like It, Hello Dolly, and Bloodline, The Children of Argos.
Oh, Bloodline. I was just talking to Ryan Rumry about Bloodline.
So is Kevin the director you've worked with the most?
Probably. I've never done a count. At the Hangar, obviously.
Yeah.
But I did something like 13 shows with him in Dallas and a couple in Houston, and so probably. I mean, James Lapine is up there now just because we've had so many productions of the same thing repeatedly. But I really think it's probably Kevin.
Yeah, because that just based on what you said, that would be 20.
Yeah. I mean, it's over 20.
They're all different.
Yeah, they're all different. We've never remounted anything. Well, they did, but I don't count that as separate shows.
Right. And then just for the audience, the other shows that you've done, the other shows you designed at the Hangar are Oklahoma, Rent, November, the rep of No Child and Bad Dates.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
Doubt.
Yep, I remember Doubt.
Cats.
Cats.
And Ever So Humble.
Oh, I liked that play, Tim's play.
Yes, Tim's play. So Ever So Humble was a new play.
Mm-hmm.
So do you approach new plays differently?
Absolutely, because anything can fly out the window at any second in time. And it also depends, right? So like a new play generally has a living playwright, right? So like you have an additional collaborator in the room. So you need to, as a designer, take that opinion into consideration because they are, another voice. They are the voice. They are creating this story, and you have to be able to work as dramaturg and co-collaborator with them. Whereas if you're doing Shakespeare, like he's been dead a long time. Like you can't rip that apart. You can't like phone him up and be like, I don't understand Laertes' motivation right here. Like this line is really off and it doesn't line up with everything else he said today. Where you can can you explain, you can ask these playwrights like what they really mean, and always with the director. Like you have to do this as a group. You can't just like go rogue. But it really helps to be able to get into the mind of characters, like even to get backstory. Like I love backstory. I love being able to sort of figure out where they got to, how they got to where they got to. It's sort of the most fun part is that development. And so yes and no, I guess. Like no, because like the process is the same. You still have to research, you still have to read the play a bajillion times, you still have to have the meetings, you still got to do some kind of drawing or collage. But the rest of it's kind of more fun because you like get to do anything. But then also you could be in the middle of tech in Delaware with a 300 costume show and they throw out one of the giant dance numbers that you had all the costumes built for and you have to input a new dance number, but it's 1960s, you have no budget left, and the closest vintage store is in Philly.
Of course.
It
happens.
It happens. But that's the excitement. It's like, I'm a problem solver. Like I said earlier, I'm a problem solver. So I kind of thrive on that, like, oh shit, how do we fix this? And it, in those experiences, like, listen, you're not on Broadway, you don't have millions. Like there's that matrix of like good, fast, and cheap.
Yep.
Often it's often cheap, right? Like, especially in these days, I don't even want to know what's going to be going forward, but like, sometimes the solutions aren't the most elegant, but they work.
Absolutely. So do you also have a preference between period or modern shows? Or contemporary, I should say, not modern.
I hate designing modern shows. Here's the thing. I love seeing and watching modern stories because I actually think at the moment in time, especially we are, and that we were ramping up to prior to COVID, like we were really starting to get to see a lot of different voices on stage, which always excites me because like I like to be in a theater to hear stories I don't know, and to be active in them. Like that's the difference for me between theater and like Netflix. Like I love my Netflix. I am like the queen of a binge, but like that's a passive way to absorb a story. Whereas when you're an audience member in a theater, it's very active. And so like to sit through a piece, I mean, it was years ago, but like a piece like Fela, like, which was just pure energy, you feed off of that. And you also get to receive a story that you would maybe not have seen otherwise. So that's actually like, and I love to do new pieces that necessarily aren't, modern, but like the problem with a modern dress show is that everybody, like I said earlier, everybody puts on clothes every day. So everyone in the room thinks they're an expert. From, the 14th assistant to the left to the boyfriend of a producer to the usher walking back in the back of the stage. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, like, and all respect for all of those roles, like, no one's telling the set designer that, well, actually, that's a lie. In a modern show, often everybody, because of HGTV, is starting to shout the shame shit to set designers. Like, oh, well, where's your shiplap wall? Everyone should have shiplap. You know, I mean, I'm sure we're like, oh, you know, you should get that thing from West Elm. I saw the thing, you know, so it's, you know, I was at Target the other day and it's like, well, actually, I can't use that shirt from Target because, like, there's so much action that's going to rip apart tomorrow,
Right.
you know. So there's all this stuff that goes into it that nobody really thinks about with modern dress clothing, like, especially on a long run. It's just going to fall apart. Like, you get this tiny budget. I'm like, well, I can't really shop at Walmart because it'll fall apart tomorrow. And that's something like you and I have discussed many times over, like, how long is the run?
Mm-hmm.
What do we need?
Yeah, because what is it that a week of shows is equivalent to a year of wear?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Because obviously you're doing the same movement and the same stress on it every day for 7 or 8 performances.
Right. And it's not movement like you and I sitting here in our Zoom meetings every day.
Right.
Like, I mean, I learned a big old lesson on the Joseph with knee slides. I mean, that was my first. And you were like, well, obviously, Jen, they were going to be doing knee slides. And I was like, this is my first big musical. Now it's obvious.
Well, of course they were doing knee slides. Dan connect us.
I know, but I didn't know, Dan. Well, now I know.
Great. And so then your first Broadway show was 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee.
With our friend Dan Connectus.
Yep.
And yeah.
So, how many times have you actually done that show now?
Oh, I don't know. Barrington Stage, off-Broadway, Broadway, Chicago, San Francisco, the tour, Boston. There was a remount at Barrington Stage. I think I'm missing one.
Wow. So 9 times.
9 times.
How much did it change from time to time for you? Obviously, if actors change, that's different. But
the first 3 changes were the biggest. So it was, you know, from, well, the first to the second. So Barrington Stage to second stage was quite different because we actually could design the show. I was actually hired a week before rehearsal started at Barrington Stage.
Really?
So,
I had no idea.
Yeah. I was hired for Spelling Bee because Michael Unger, who was the director at the time, was working at Barrington Stage for Julie Boyd, whose assistant was Donna Harrell, and Donna Harrell was Kevin Moriarty's assistant director on the Joseph at the Hangar, which I did because you and Jared Lee said I should do it. This is coming back to how Adam Zonder has gotten me all of my jobs. Yeah. Have I never actually said that to you?
No, I had no idea because that was actually going to be a question I was going to ask is how did spelling bee come about?
That's how that happened, and because Dan was working on it and we had a good time at Joseph, right? So so I was hired like a week before rehearsal started. So it was, I call it triage design. You're just sort of like reacting. It's reactive. It's not very proactive. So when we got to second stage, James really liked a lot of what we had done, and we streamlined it. And I was also young and, you know, wanting to please this giant of theatrical, you know, he was a mover and shaker, and I was petrified because he was James Lapine, and I was 26 and 6 months out of graduate school. Like, that should not have happened. You know what I mean? And so that change was pretty vast. And then from second stage to Broadway, there was like 1 or 2 little things we changed. And then James gets a little bored. So we would be in other cities and he'd be like, we need to change Barfy for this thing. And I still can't not call him Barfay because like for so long he was Barfy until a preview at second stage when he said it's Barfay with an accent aigu as a improv thing. And so like that was not there. And so like he's still Barfy in my head anyway. So we changed that sometimes. Like there was just like little things that like the hair, because we didn't have wigs in the show. So it literally was like every different person brought their own personality to that project.
Wow. Did Barrington know that the show was going to go on, or was it just a fun chance?
They knew.
Good.
They knew. I don't think they thought we would all go with it. I was surprised I went with it. I had a really funny interview with James to stay with the show, and Bill Finn actually was the one who supported me in staying on the project. Bill Finn, the composer, lyricist of that show. So he was a pretty big champion for me. I was very lucky to, at that age and at that point in my career, have gotten that opportunity.
Wow, that's fantastic. And then you've gotten to have the experience of the Broadway show that got canceled, not because of COVID, with Nerds.
Yeah, Nerds. That was hell.
Sorry.
Okay. It's really like,
How close was it?
How what?
How close did it get?
We were going to Tech. We were like 2 days from Tech.
Wow.
So the cast, my favorite story about the show is the cast had just finished the run through of the show and sang the line, which is the last line of the play, which was "Live Your Dream." And the swindler of a producer who tanked us walked into the room right as they sang "Live Your Dream" and was like, "Yeah, show's canceled," and walked out. I'm simplifying the conversation, but like,
wow.
Yeah. And again, I'm totally oversimplifying it for time, but, and I was not there in the room that day. I was actually on a plane home because I had just gotten wind that the show was getting canceled, and I had to figure out how to return as much stuff as possible so that we could use that money to pay vendors who had already built costumes. To the point where like that producer actually tried to say that none of the sets or costume designs were approved, therefore they didn't owe us any more money.
No.
And the set was in the theater. And then he literally kept saying, "Well, no, it's not." And like, everyone's like, "No, the set was in you can't wish it away. It was there. There was a bill of landing." But like my wardrobe soup was waiting for her supplies to show up at the theater that morning. And so she was like standing and like she sees the props truck because they're the ones who do the delivery. Like that's the union person who brings the stuff in and out of a Broadway theater. So the props truck like pulls up and they get the call the show is canceled and they just keep going. So like all of her kit and her equipment is on this truck that one of the other producers like drove her personally with a U-Haul to go get it. Otherwise she couldn't have worked. Like her stuff was going to be in like legal hock for a year or two, you know. It's crazy.
Wow.
There are people I know who still never got paid.
That's
that
crazy.
project.
That's crazy.
It's powerful.
So we're getting close on a little bit of time here. So Faith, do you have anything that you were currently working on that had to get canceled or postponed due to the pandemic? I'm sure you did.
A lot of everything, actually. I have one project left that got postponed until next year. And a second one, I think, has resurfaced. They claim to be doing a show in January in Arizona.
Okay.
I'm like, you can pay me my first payment. I don't know. We're in a pandemic. I don't know. So, I mean, maybe they've worked out similar, right? Like the equity thing and streaming, perhaps,
Right.
is how they're going to do it. And it's a one-person show, so, like, I feel comfortable with that. But I had a production of Candide that I was so excited to do at good speed with Darko Tresnak, and I've been waiting to work with him, wanting to work with him for years. Brilliant director, and gone. Like, they're not even going to reprogram it in another season. It's an expensive
that's
show.
so sad.
I mean, like, what a great show for right now. Like, the false optimism, like, come on. Like, oh, it was so good. I was doing Clue, The Paper Mill. I still haven't heard from them, but I'm assuming that's canceled because that was October. I mean, I had probably 2 or 3 dozen. And then Sesame Street, we're supposed to go back usually in October, but I don't think we're going to head back until early next year.
Yeah, but it's not like Sesame Street's going to go away.
No, it's not going away. It would just be nice. I just bought a house. I want to, pay for it.
What a novel concept.
I know. Although the mortgage on that's way cheaper than a New York City apartment. So.
Yes, that's what I've heard from a lot of people.
Yep.
So do you have any thoughts about where theater and costume design might be heading because of this pandemic?
Oh, geez. I have a lot of thoughts. I think that the one thing I know is that people want to be together.
Yes.
So people will figure out a way to be together. And part of that is to see stories. I don't know how we'll solve that, honestly, until the pandemic is over, but it will be over. Like, history dictates that pandemics end probably in 18 to 24 months if we don't get a vaccine before then. You know what I mean? Like, we will get through this. People have been through worse. This is horrible, but like, here we are. History tells us that it will end. I hope that on the other side, we will grow, that we have this time to like figure out what we need to do. I mean, there's like terrible labor practices in theater. Maybe we could address that in this time off.
Yep.
There's a lot of racism. Maybe we can address that in this time off. Sexism, all these things that like we say we never have time to deal with, or we kind of brush under the rug because admins often are like, I'm bringing out the ugly, dirty side right now. But like, that's my hope, is that like, we have this time before we can gather again to make a better world for all of us. Cause like the world's not working. Like it's just,
No, it's not.
No matter what side of the aisle you're on, the world is not working for any of us, most of us, So, my hope is that we can figure out how to gather before we have a vaccine. What does that mean? Is that socially distant outdoor theater? Is that socially distant performances like you're saying with streaming, so that like, if you feel the need to be with humans, you can be with humans, because we are not meant to be in our own individual caves. Like even as families, like no family is meant to be around each other 24/7.
Not for this long a time.
Not for this long, and it's not ending anytime soon. So I don't think that necessarily answers your question, but like, I know we'll come back, but we can't say the new normal. It's just going to be new.
Yes.
And that's what we have to solve, is the new, not the like, how do we shoehorn what we used to do into this new world order? I just
having to pivot into the new thing.
Yeah.
Which will be similar,
right,
but not exact.
Yeah, it's like we have to figure out what this experience is going to be and what it means to be an American sitting in a theater. And I think it's going to be different for every regional theater, because
I agree.
Their communities are wildly different. A theater in Connecticut is wildly different than a theater in Atlanta.
Yes, absolutely.
And Ithaca is different from New York City.
And we're all going through it differently.
Yeah, I hear there's like no cases in Tompkins County.
Very, very few. We're lucky.
That's great. I mean, New York City is like super low right now. Knock on wood. Everyone stay away from Florida. Just don't come back.
Yes. A few other places, but Florida most definitely.
Right. Snowbirds. We don't want I'm sorry, snowbirds. But we love you. Stay in Florida. Or quarantine, right? Just quarantine.
Yes.
Like do the thing.
Close the state.
Right. Do the thing. So yeah. And then in terms of costume design, it really is. I mean, I was talking with a friend yesterday who's a builder. She's a dressmaker. She was like, I had a fitting a couple days ago, and I'm used to putting my safety pins in my mouth, but I was wearing a mask. She's like, I don't like the things that we just do. I mean, she's, in her late 40s. Like, she's been doing this for 20 something years. And putting pins in your mouth is terrible. I've had friends inhale pins. Like, don't do that. But also it's a thing everyone does, it's like cigarette smoking. Some people smoke, a lot of us don't, but like, it's bad for you and they still do it. So like people stick pins in their mouth. Or, like how do you touch people? How do we do hair? And so all of that, yes, you can wear PPE, but a big part of my job is empathy and listening. And it's really hard to listen without
being able to see most of your face.
We listen with our eyes, we listen with our expressions. And so I think it's what we're going to learn how to hopefully verbalize these things better, because we have to. I mean, we can't, there's no silent communication if you can only see eyeballs.
Right. You know, we have to figure out the new ways to communicate.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't really have an answer of how it will, I don't know how the world will look. I'm not a soothsayer, or do I have a crystal ball? Boy, do I wish I did. But like, I think I've started to be able to figure out what we need to solve.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Jen. This has been great. I'd like to once again thank our sponsor, Meyer Farm Distillers. And thanks for joining me today, Jen.
Hey, it's really fun. Hopefully I didn't get too, I get real passionate about some things these days. What else do we have to think about, right?
No, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.